Let's be real. This year's defensive line has struggled, but DeShaun Foster has made it one of his goals to improve upon it with this year's recruiting class, including trying to steal a former BYU commit.
You are Locked On UCLA, your daily podcast on the UCLA Bruins. Part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Welcome, everybody, to this edition of Locked On UCLA. I'm your host, Zach Anderson-Yoxsimer. Thanks for making this show your first listen each and every day. It's free wherever you get your podcast, and it's available on YouTube. Like, comment, subscribe. Thanks for your support. This episode is brought to you by Game Time. Download the Game Time app, create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCOLLEGE for $20 off your first purchase. And where we get started is the 2025 UCLA recruiting class, all right? This is something that is going to be the staple for DeShaun Foster's ability to grow the program, whether it's continuing at the NIL, continuing to pay for play. But in the end of the day, you got to get the kids in the program. And until UCLA, we see what they can do in the transfer portal, it's building back up the high school recruiting that went dormant during the Chip Kelly era. It was as brutal as it gets in last year's class. So what has UCLA done so far while working on another recruiter too coming up so far? Well, the Bruins, if you look at different reports, whether it's 24/7, whether it's Rivals, UCLA pushing on a top 35, top 30 class. And with another recruiter too, if they flip one or something changes, they could see themselves in the top 25. Or they could see themselves bottoming out towards the top 40, top 45. Right now, they kind of sit in the happy medium between those two with some talented gets. Of course, some of the talented guys, including Man Iamaleava, who is the quarterback that currently is at Long Beach Poly, but is not playing his senior year alongside Jace Brown, his receiver brethren. But currently, if you look at the 24/7 sports site, UCLA's top-rated commit, just ahead of Madden, the quarterback, you've got Sitanilei. That's a defensive edge, 6'5", 220 out of St. John Bosco. All right, let's talk about the rest of their 17 commits. A lot of them defensive heavy because UCLA is going to lose a lot of senior veteran-laden talent this year to the portal, to the draft, to just simply eligibility. UCLA is going to have a hard hit defensively, and they need to replenish it, and most importantly, replenish what's lacking this year, the defensive talent from last year's team that's just gone from this year's team. So again, the best top-rated recruit of the current 17 hard commits for UCLA, the 17 verbals, is Sitanilei. If I'm saying his name wrong, okay, we'll get it right. But he's a four-star kid committed back in June with that flurry of commitments DeShaun Foster got in the summer window to make sure UCLA looked like a program that wasn't crumbling after Chip Kelly practically did not care about the 24 recruiting class or 25. Other D-line guys they're going after, right? Julius Walls from Pittsburgh, 3-star edge, 6'2.5". He was a hard commit on August 21st. All right, so that's two guys on the D-line. Now you get my point. We're keep going down. Scott Taylor, a hybrid player. I believe he was recruited to do multiple different things, but Scott Taylor is listed as an edge. We'll see what he plays as the 6'4" product out of Loyola High School, Catholic school, in the near downtown LA area. All right. And then we keep going further down. And then you've got Tyler Partlow from St. Thomas More out of Oakdale, Connecticut. And 4 of these 16, 17 hard commits, a quarter, 25% of these commits is what DeShaun Foster is allocating his resources toward getting a D-line. We saw what UCLA did last year with a dominant D-line, with, of course, a superstar talent in Leatu Latu, both the Murphy twins, and everything come together, like a Jay Tawia with all those players, Keanu Williams with all those players. One of the best defenses, most disruptive defenses UCLA's ever had with Danton Lynn. And I still think they could do something similar with Kakai Malloy if they have the pieces in place. All right? Now, Danton Lynn didn't have a lot of time to really put his stamp into recruiting. Kakai Malloy has had similar experience, not having a lot of time, being pushed up, thrust into position, elevated into a vacant position. But I think he's done admirably despite looking at the numbers. You get the eye test. UCLA's been able to hang decently with what they've had on defense this year, whether they lost pieces in the secondary or done so. Now, when you look at what they're trying to get, UCLA, it's not really technically a flip, but a former BYU commit that just decommitted, a kid from Pasadena. You've got Cole Cogshell, who goes to John Muir High School, all right? That's literally in the shadow and back door of UCLA in John Muir. He's a 25 kid. He is an 87 overall rating, 3-star product, whether you're looking at Rivals, whether you're looking at 24/7 Sports, just recently decommitted from BYU. And he's getting recruited by a few West Coast schools, look like Boston College as well. Decommitted on October 28th. UCLA on October 29th officially offered the kid, and then in the matter of a day or so, out of nowhere, it looks like there's a crystal ball from Greg Biggins saying, hey, looks like he's now going to go to UCLA. Another one of those situations that DeShaun Foster is keeping an eye on. His recruiting staff that he's assembled is keeping an eye on. You know, the general managers, the recruiting coordinators, your defensive coordinator, they're keeping those eyes on, hey, that's a talented kid at a spot we desperately need talent. He's in our own backyard. And where the UCLA did a little elbow and a nudge, or he didn't want to go to BYU, that recruitment's open, and UCLA swooped in, all right? There's a few times in recent years UCLA's lost a couple of those guys. They had the big swoop in to get Dante Moore a couple years ago before he eventually transferred back to his original commitment place at Oregon. But all UCLA has to do is, hey, there's a kid in Pasadena at a spot of need. You know, you got to make sure everything's order for UCLA, the academics, the character, the skill, the quality, the potential growth. You got to hit on all those guys when you're going after the local recruits. But more often than not, you will find a talented player, a quality character football player that can help improve the discipline, respect, enthusiasm pillars of DeShaun Foster's program. And we know this year, if UCLA had a decent defensive line with some, guys who could rush the passer, not just hodgepodge mix of transfers, and I know they're doing their best. Kaika Malloy's trying to figure out what he can do to generate any sort of pressure on the opposition's quarterback, which will be a problem this week against a strong, physical Nebraska team. If they could do that, their defensive numbers would be even better, and they wouldn't be one of the worst third down defenses by percentage. All right? The conversion rates would not be as high as they would be for the opposition. Now, UCLA, that is what DeShaun Foster is focused on. Now, I know it's been interesting. They got the quarterback was the highlight, the guy's receiver a highlight, but they're not playing. And I don't know any information, but hey, you never know when a kid's not playing how that's going to go for a college that's recruiting him, or how that's going to go if people want to keep their commitment with no longer a national letter of intent being the game, but it's name, image, likeness, pay for play. All right. But hey, getting bulk commitments means that at the worst, if that 5 or 6 whittles down to 5 or 4, you still have a lot, as opposed to getting 4 commitments going into 3 or 2, right? They are building up an assortment of options defensively. And I still like what they have in this 17-man, maybe soon to be 18-man if Cole Cogshell decides to commit. Now, there's another guy UCLA's been in on for a while, McKay Madsen. He is a Central Valley kid from Clovis. UCLA was in on him. He is a hybrid athlete, technically a running back, 6'1", super fast, guy who does track and field. But it looks like Oregon, with the latest crystal ball, is supposed to snag him. Maybe he can go do both things at Oregon. I'm not entirely sure what his whole thing is. But UCLA sneaking in and getting Cogshell from their own backyard. They've been in on McKay Madsen. He's been reported and talked about for a long time as a sneaky coveted 3-star recruit. Maybe could jump up to a 4-star by the season's end. But it looks like Oregon has got their claws in that NIL former national letter of intent environment to get him and get his commitment. He is not committed at this moment. He is crystal balled to Oregon, just like Cogshell is now crystal balled to UCLA days after a decommitment. And generally when that happens, it's all good. However, as we saw with UCLA basketball, if somebody comes and lays the stack of cash or makes a Godfather-like offer, things can change at the last minute for any of these kids. If they go have a big playoff run against stout opponents, or all of a sudden make national news or make a state bowl, things could change in a heartbeat when all these teams and all these coaches with their jobs on the line realize, hey, there's a talented kid, we can go snag him. Which means UCLA not only has to identify the talent, be able to flip/steal the commitments of this talent, but to retain the talent in the NIL betting wars, which we'll find out soon enough how DeShaun Foster and company and what UCLA overall in an NIL community and the champion of Westwood NIL Collective with all the fans, with all the support from administration below that UC and above to give to UCLA football. What can they do to hang with the rest of the beasts? Because they still got to grow. All right. This is year one, but this is the same thing happening in year two on the football field for DeShaun Foster. It will be even uglier if this is the same product UCLA pushes out next year, because they're only getting younger. They're only getting younger defensively. And hopefully it means they get more talented and they get better. We'll find out. Next, there's a New York Times article and something fascinating I was kind of looking into about how has UCLA handled the travel and all these new conference members, all these new teams dealing with the travel and conference realignment. An ongoing discussion we won't know for years, time with lots of data. Let's see what New York Times has to say, UCLA being a big focal point of that article. Next on Locked On UCLA. You're thinking about what you're going to go watch this weekend, the next couple weeks. You're making plans. Maybe families coming in town. You got the big sports starting, some of which are even ending. And you maybe want to snag a ticket, whether it's the World Series, the NBA beginning, or you want to go see a comedy event, a musical event, a theatrical experience. Game Time's got all those. And with Game Time Picks, it helps you filter out the fluff, showing only incredible deals on great seats. So you don't have to spend your time wasting through thousands of tickets, right? Well, you don't want to waste time. And they've got zone deals that helped me when I was buying my tickets for big-time events. It's like, hey, that's a great deal. And they can beat the other ticketing services as well. You're like, man, I think that's a zone deal. And you snag that real quick, and you're saving lots of dollars. And when you use the code LOCKEDONCollege, you'll save $20 off your first purchase today. Terms apply, but let's check it out once again. All you got to do, take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app. Create an account, use the code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. It worked for me, saved me some money. I enjoyed it. Terms apply. Create an account, Locked On College, LOCKEDONCOLLEGE, Locked On College for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. All right, here we go. Locked On UCLA. We're going on with this segment, taking a little interesting look at what UCLA athletics has had to deal with when it comes to all this travel in this 2024 fall season. Now, it's an article titled "College Football is Big Business," and something about how the athletes, they're going to miss classes, right? In the New York Times, it's written by Billy Witz, who is officially reporting from UCLA. It's actually dropped on October 30th, the same day that we're recording this podcast, the day before Halloween. So what it talked about, and the article starts, is all right, UCLA's travel. We all know the thousands and thousands of miles, right? Every broadcast you'll watch, this is where they go. This is where they went. This is where they'll go next. And now they stay at home, right? It's the same thing every broadcast. They're going to talk about it because for the casual non-UCLA fan, they're like, whoa, that's a lot of miles to travel. Well, we know, and we've known for a long time, once they released this schedule and the dates, that was going to be a brutal stretch. But what are the after effects, right? The amount of traveling, 22,226 miles this year going around. That's equivalent to what the article says, 33 round trips to the Bay Area to play Stanford or UC Berkeley. All right, that is what it matters for UCLA, okay? And, you know, what Carson Schlesinger was quoted as saying, it's just that the long flights are definitely a new thing. That's the age of college football for a UCLA team that does not have a win at home this year. Surprisingly, right? So let's take a look at what it's happening in these different sports so far in the fall. Well, we know what's happening in the football team, right? The murderer's row of scheduling when it came to Indiana, LSU on the road, Oregon at home was number 1, Penn State on the road is number 3, and then Minnesota, who's a scrappy 5-win team at this moment. Interesting, right? And if you're looking at all the teams who have won in the Big Ten with long flights, they've largely won at USC or they won at UCLA. And that's been the outlier this year. So what does it mean? How has UCLA done? They've actually won 2 road games at Hawaii, and then they won at Rutgers. But the thing was, when they came back from Hawaii, there was a bye, they got pummeled by Indiana. Closer game at LSU, came back home, lost by 21 points to Oregon. fought and clawed against Penn State, faltered in the second half against Minnesota, but actually went out and performed decently in Rutgers. All right. Now, some of that has to do with coaching. Some of it has to do with adjustments. UCLA, though, I just wonder after this bye, how rested will they be? They still got to go to Nebraska. They got to go to Washington, which is basically like a 2-minute drive compared to where they've gone this year. But still, Seattle's not exactly the closest, but it's certainly not the farthest flight for UCLA in their new Big Ten era. We've seen they've gotten up for road games, but home games have been a bit of a clunker. Now, that has to do with the fans. It has to do with a lot of things, the opponents. There's a lot of things factoring into football. So let's take a look at the women's soccer schedule. Something I thought that was interesting for the team that fell just a little short of winning a Big Ten regular season title, finishing the regular season 13-3-3. This year, Marguerite Elzas's team went and played a bunch of California teams in the non-conference. And I mean a bunch, right? Or West Coast teams, and they played them in California. They went to Long Beach. They hosted UC Riverside, went to Cal Poly, hosted Santa Clara, hosted BYU, went to Pepperdine, all right? And Pepperdine was their first loss in those first 4 or 5 games, all right? Not really giving up a goal, maybe a poor loss at Pepperdine. They went across the country to Knoxville to maybe prepare themselves for what it would be like playing Big Ten top-tier opponents against SEC schools early in the non-conference. They came back from Knoxville and then going to Lexington in Kentucky without scoring a goal and only 1 point out of it. A loss and a point. What did UCLA come back to? A win against Oregon, or a win at Oregon. Then they had to go to Bloomington. So UCLA had 4 straight road matchups. They went from Knoxville to Kentucky, to Lexington and Kentucky, flew back to go play Oregon a couple of days later, won, beat Indiana, then go back to Purdue, only to come back and play Wisconsin that first time out after all that travel at home. Couldn't score a goal against Wisconsin at home. All right, so then they go beat Minnesota. They beat Washington, a couple of home games. Then they go to the Illinois, right? They go to Northwestern in Illinois, the Illinois schools. They go to the Fighting Illini, and they get a couple of wins. But then the women's soccer team, to look at it, they come back, play Penn State, and they don't score a goal. They don't go get a win. Now I look at it, yes, Wisconsin was a preseason top 25 contender, Penn State a contender in the Big Ten, but they come back home after those road trips. Maybe they don't have their legs under them, right? So then they play Ohio State, they lose to SC, but a couple of those games, they go across the country, they don't win against some top-tier teams, they come back after long road trips, they don't score a goal, scoreless draws, and this is the day and age where they don't play overtime, right? They used to play an extra 30 minutes, 120 minutes. I can't imagine where college soccer would be if they didn't add all those, if they had all those minutes added in like they used to with the golden goal sudden death that made college soccer so fun. All right. So now you look at those. UCLA, after some long road trips, now they're playing the Big Ten tournament in Minnesota, in St. Paul, where they're either going to play at Minnesota or Penn State, which is a very tough first-round matchup for UCLA in the Big Ten tournament on the afternoon of November 3rd. All right. Make sure to set those clocks back. Now, let's take a look at the men's soccer team. And for the record, UCLA women's soccer, their road numbers, 7-3-1. Obviously, your road numbers are most likely going to be worse than your home numbers, but they've affected those home numbers with a couple of losses. Take a look at the men's soccer schedule. The men have only played 5 road matches this year. All right. There's a lot less teams that play men's soccer than those that play women's soccer. This team this year, 6 wins, 4 losses, 5 draws, an even record, 3 wins, 3 losses, 3 draws in Big Ten play. Now, let's take a look at what they've done so far. From August 22nd until September 13th, almost a full month before UCLA actually went on the road. All right. They played Northwestern, got a big win after tying Denver, who was a top-tier contender. They went to Madison, lost, and came back 5 days later and gave up 3 goals against Michigan at home. Then they played Westmont. They host Michigan State. They lose that game, go to Penn State, get a tie, get a win against Ohio State, a big win against Ohio State. They were able to beat Rutgers, but then go on the road to Maryland and come back home and lose to Indiana. So you see, it's not always those quick trips out that are affecting them. It's how they come back home and they respond. So all those trips, and then we say, hey, a couple of times when this UCLA team, both the men's and women's soccer team, has come home, they've been scoreless or held to an upset loss at home, or in some cases, a loss against a top-tier contender. But they've come back and lost at home. Interesting to look at. Let's take a look at this women's volleyball schedule, which I think has maybe been more brutal than the football schedule. Definitely more brutal than the soccer schedule. This is what UCLA had to do on the women's volleyball sky, right? For Alfie Reft and company. A 10-9 women's volleyball schedule. They're 4-6 in their first year in the Big Ten, which cares a lot about volleyball. They are 4-6 on the road. The Bruins are 2-3 at home. UCLA has played 14 true road/neutral site games and only 5 home matches this year. While the Bruins, by my count, have 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 more home matches. It's not going to add up to all the rest of the other road matches, because remember, the volleyball season goes deep into December, or goes into December, compared to soccer, which ends the first weekend of December. This is what UCLA has done so far. All right, this is what the women's volleyball team has had to do when it comes to travel this year, as my computer decides to be goofy. To begin the season, UCLA, the women's volleyball team, went to Atlanta. All right, they started 2-0, including a 5-setter. UCLA has played a lot of 5-setters this year. All right, cool. That happened in August, early September. Next weekend, they go out to Knoxville and play Tennessee. They beat LIU, but they lost to Tennessee in a true road match. Okay, the next weekend, they go out to Fort Worth, Texas. Okay, so they started in Georgia. They go to Tennessee. All right, then they go to Texas and play 3 matchups, including ending in a 4-set loss. The first matchup they played to begin the season with a match in California was actually against Davis, who they lost to. A Big West team in UC Davis in 4 sets, a true road match, but they lost to them. A couple days later, they played Cal, former Pac-12 rival turned ACC nemesis, who they're giving $10 million to just to beat them and sweep them. All right, then they go to Nebraska, come back home and play Ohio State, and then one of many 5-set losses when they lost to Minnesota at home, lost to Michigan at home. They beat Washington on the road, but lost to USC at home. So a lot of these matches, they've been playing 5-setters. UCLA has lost 5 5-set matches this year. 5. And they lost 5 in a row after winning one of the first 5-setters of the year in the opening match against Georgia Tech. So after they've gone all the way across the country in non-conference, 3 straight weekends, mind you, then you still got to go to travel in all these Big Ten road matchups. I just wonder how much steam they have, how much stamina they're burning by losing all these 5-set matches when they had a 2-1 lead against USC, when they had a bigger lead against Purdue, and they end up just blowing it. All right, a lot of these times they're kind of fading in the back half of matches when they're losing when it comes to critical points. Now I wonder what that's going to mean when it comes to what UCLA former Chancellor Gene Block was quoted in this article about how these athletes sleep. It's according to circadian rhythms and everything, right? Better sleep schedule, better mental health regimen, more nutritional status, and all these things, right? But the early things, yes, UCLA has had some brutal schedules set up for this season. And I guess I'm not sure why UCLA had so many. I'm not sure if Pauly had some renovation or the gym had some renovation that UCLA couldn't be using. But 5 home matches, non-conference home matches, is a brutal stretch when you go to Georgia. And yes, it is more common in the women's volleyball world to go on the road and play these quick tournaments, get 3 or 4 games, and then they come back and settle in for a 2-match per week basis. But with all the Big Ten scheduling, you would have thought maybe like the soccer teams, they would play a couple of home matches first, here, there, and everywhere, as opposed to going to Georgia, Tennessee, Texas, before even stepping in California for an official match. And even then they went to Northern California. Then they went to Nebraska and finally played at home. So these schedules are brutal. So think about that when basketball's going. Women's basketball's going to Paris to start the season. That's quoted in this New York Times article. Going East Coast 3 times, going north a few times. It's a wild year. And we'll only see if that burns out these UCLA athletes or if it doesn't. We'll find out. But we still got to cheer them on forever and ever and ever for each endeavor. So get your hands up, Bruins fans. 8 clap time. We'll talk more UCLA, Nebraska next time out. All right, we'll talk UCLA, Nebraska, some keys to look for. How do the Bruins stop the Cornhusker true freshman quarterback? How do the Bruins generate any offense against Nebraska's pretty strong defense? Okay, we'll talk about that next. 8 clap time, baby. And 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. UCLA, fight, fight, fight. This has been Locked On UCLA. Zach signing off. Go Bruins.